Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the podcast, I was going to say. Welcome to the webinar Opportunities for Equitable Outcomes, Empowering All Students by Strengthening Executive Function. Thank you for your interest in this topic. I have the chat open for all of you. Please share where you're from, what your interest in this topic is all about, what kind of role and responsibilities you have, which requires you to integrate the two. And it's going to be a great journey. So strap on a belt and be ready because we have a lot to cover. So to begin with, I want to kind of start, many of you may know me, but I'm a speech and language pathologist by training. I specialize in executive function for the last 20 years. I have also developed a software curriculum, a full year-on curriculum, and I believe that fundamentally we should be teaching executive function as a foundational skills and that address the process of learning how to learn. And I'm really hoping that we can prioritize that in the backdrop of equity as well as pandemic. So let's begin. So we have four things we're going to talk about, which you have in the learning outcomes. So I won't repeat it. But first, I want to take a minute to set the tone of this presentation that America is not a place where chance of birth or circumstance should decide our destiny. And that is why we need to build new ladders of opportunity into the middle class for all who are willing to climb them. And I'm centering my conversation today based on President Barack Obama's invitation for us to think about what does ladders of opportunity really mean? And are there ladders of opportunity? So to set the tone again, let's kind of get the ground covered with talk about these three terms: diversity, inclusion, and equity. So just as an exercise, do you mind typing in what do you understand from the term diversity, inclusion, and equity? So take a minute to define these words, throw in some buzzwords that you might have come across. Bulleted definition is fine, whatever comes to your mind. And do you see a distinction between the two? Belonging, I love that. Lama, thank you. So while some of you are taking a minute to type this, I will continue my conversation, but please see if engagement, equity is the kids at the baseball field. I love that video. I'm not going to use that in the presentation today. We will have a visual graphic representing that for sure. So this is how I wanted to set up the conversation today. If we think about a basic two buckets, one is outcomes versus approach. So diversity is the presence of difference within a given setting. And are we making sure the setting allows the diverse presence? But the second, inclusion, is welcoming, valuing, and leveraging individuals with different identities within a given setting. And so the emphasis here is leveraging. And thank you, Sarah, for writing diversity means different groups, including disabilities and abilities people. Very important part of equity. So typically, the third part, though, equity is a process or an approach that ensures everyone has access to the same opportunities. So typically what literature is describing this is that diversity and inclusion is a result, but equity is an intentional approach. So we're going to spend our remaining 55 minutes talking about the distinction between the outcome versus approach. So it's great to report on diversity and inclusion, but we have to really look at the fundamental structure that allowed that to happen. So welcome everybody, keep chatting with us, tell us where you're from, tell us what interests you in this topic. So this is a typical field. I see a modification here. Instead of, I think, baseball, now we are seeing a football field, but does our current educational approach consistently prioritize equitable outcomes? So as I said, equitable outcome is a result of a process that is being put in place. And so we are investigating the process. So as you can see, equality is everybody has the same leg to stand on. Equity is based on your height or based on your capabilities. You get a little bit more leg up versus less leg up. You don't even need a leg up if you can stand tall and have a complete access to the field. So let's begin with this. Achievement gap between student groups have narrowed slightly. And this is a longitudinal study published by NCN CES. It's 1990 to 2015, and this is eighth grade math achievement. And you can see the progression is that everybody's achieving and everybody's making progress. But real disheartening thing here is if the level of proficiency is here, the student groups, as you can see, all the student groups that are lagging behind are the BIPOC community. But really remarkable, despairing kind of diverse outcomes is more evident at the lowest of the lower rung, and that's our Black students. So that's one thing for us to think about. So now, second important educational concern that all of us are invested in, and equity is a very equity as a process can be measured or can be evident in this space, which is suspension rates by student group. So this is also 2011-12 study that shows that there are gaps. For sure, there are gaps. But there are two groups that are distinctly affected by this kind of outcome results or suspensions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about suspensions as they relate to self-regulation. But you can definitely see that Black students and students with disability definitely are experiencing far more negative outcomes or results. Now, let's further look at the analysis of that in terms of first referrals. And those in that educational referral system, I see that some of you are psychologists, some of you are curriculum directors. You can definitely see that the Black students, once again, the percentage of students referred for disciplinary action, there is definitely a greater number of percentage of students who are getting referred, but the percentage of those who are first-time referrals are far more affecting students who are Black. Now, so again, the question is this related to expectation? Is this related to harsher criteria that we're using to measure behaviors and performance? We'll have to really kind of come to terms with that. So the next thing is the suspension rates for students with disabilities, further disaggregated by race and ethnicity and gender, show another even finer story. And this is really disheartening because you can see that of all the students, the Black female students, Black children who are girls, are getting definitely a severe, the results are far more devastating for that particular group. And in the secondary education, as you can see. So compared to the white male counterparts, Black female students are definitely receiving far greater punishment when it comes to secondary level education. So according to 2015 report, the main engines that are of the observed differences in suspension rates are school policies, practices, and leadership, rather than differences in student behavior. And this is a really important thing that I'm going to tie back to executive function, because when we talk about behavior, that is typically the only and the most significant way we measure somebody's capacity to understand expectations and comply with it. But when somebody fails to comply with appropriate and socially appropriate responses, how do we measure that being a normal part of developing brain versus something intentionally trying to challenge authority? And are we having different standards or harsher lens to view children who are of color and their behaviors to be viewed, are they viewed differently? And yes, the data says yes. Now, another slice of this data is the high poverty schools are most likely to have classes taught by teachers out of their field. Now, we talk about teacher preparedness. I saw that somebody is actually interested in somebody's from Department of Ed, and you're looking at the professional development of teachers. But we have to really think about, if we take the data set, this is the national average, and you can see the cities, teachers in suburbs, small towns versus rural areas, all demographic. We are consistently seeing that high poverty schools, there are greater percentage of teachers who are teaching out of their field, major field of expertise. Now, how does that impact? You definitely are going to have, the teacher is going to have greater burden to meet the standards, but also understand how to make that information palatable or more deeper. And that is not because the teacher lacks the ability at all, but the teacher does need specific training to be able to talk about content that requires highly specialized training and highly specialized inculcated interest. So we can see that can create a disadvantage to our students as well. So another very interesting data point, and this is from 2013-14 NCES data again, that all-time high graduation rates still show gaps. So if we take all the students in public school that are graduating on time, we are definitely noticing that two communities stand out, which is white community and Asian community. And everybody else, which is the BIPOC community, is still behind. And the reason I'm kind of it's really for us to think about, so on-time graduation doesn't mean everybody has have greater access to the equity related issues. And this is one of my favorite educational leader. I'm in fact getting ready to interview him this afternoon on my podcast. But this is Dr. Pedro Noguera, and he's the Dean of University of Southern California. And he talks about that social science research has consistently shown that public school students with higher income parents are likelier to attain higher levels of education than their lower income peers. And there was actually, we used to have much, without thinking much, people had these assumptions that the parents of low-income families are not invested in their children's future. They're not taking the time to discipline them. They're not taking the time to educate them. And that is not actually true. It is the poverty-related disadvantages. Those are the parents who are probably holding more than one job. Those are the parents who are less available to guide their children. Those are the families who have less access to the internet. And that actually has become very evident during the pandemic. We'll talk about that in a second. So now let's talk about college completion. So we look at high school, now transitioning to college. So college completion gap, most students from highest income quartile, the top 25 percentile, complete college, while only 9% of the lowest income quartile earn a college degree. So educational, and this is again going back to policies, this goes back to student loans, this goes to first-time college students, what kind of access they have. These are the students who are required to hold a job in order to have some access to meals while they're taking classes. So they may get some scholarship to be able to attend school, but there is no guarantee that their books and their housing and their food will be taken care of. So that definitely affects the outcome as well. Now, college completion rates, once again, less than 35% of two-year community college experiences. The students are struggling there. And guess which community again is struggling the most? The impact is most seen with Black female students. As we can see, the Black students, rather, in both groups, males and females, is equally affected in this area as well. Now, so let's now talk about the pandemic a little bit. So this is a recent article that just came out, and ASCD, if you read ASCD magazine, that there was an article that summarized these outcomes, but this was a American Institute for Research 2020 National Survey of Public Education Responses to COVID. So they surveyed schools and the leadership. This is what they had to say. What did they say? The districts responded that 82% of the districts who participated in the survey responded that it's harder to provide hands-on accommodation and instructions to special ed population. And what do we know about special ed? That they have a disability that makes them a traditional way of learning really difficult, and they need some interpretation of maladies, so to speak. There needs to be some support which will allow them to be able to access equitable education, but that is simply was made difficult because of the pandemic. 73% of participants said that it was harder to provide instructional accommodations, and 57% of the participants said that it was hard to engage families for help with IEP requirements. I volunteer for a nonprofit reading to pre-K children, and today was one of my lessons. Absolutely gratifying. There were several students who participated in this pre-K Head Start program, but they were logged in from home. And I can imagine this kid, there are 25 kids sitting in a group because there were 3 teachers manning the classroom, and they were supporting the children. They were all wearing masks, but a few students were not able to come to the classroom for various reasons. They were at home. and several children were not even on the camera. They were jumping, running around. You can imagine, those who have children can imagine how hard it is to engage kids to sit still and be engaged in the digital technology, or entire communication with their class experience is through digital space, can be really hard on little kids, or any kids for that matter. So equity beyond the school wall. So let's not just think about equity. And again, for the time constraints that I have, and this has been a deep study of mine, and there are lots and lots of, there are in fact 5 systems that systemic disenfranchisement can affect outcomes for people of color. But I'm focusing simply on education, and I'm showing one little relationship to healthcare. So 2020 pandemic survey of Black and Latino Americans showed that they face greater mental health and economic challenges from COVID than white American counterparts. And the questions were such as been unable to pay for the basic necessity like food, heat, and rent. As you can see, they were a lot more the BIPOC community was reporting that much more at higher percentages, used up all or most of our savings during this COVID time, borrowed money or took a loan to support the need of the family, and suffered from any economic or many economic consequences. So just as I make this case, there are deep structural disparities in our country. And the pandemic has affected people of color disproportionately more. And this is David Blumenthal, who is the president of Commonwealth Fund. And he was saying that persistent wealth gaps, inadequate access to healthcare, poor living conditions, and unsafe work environments are just a few of the root causes for why this pandemic has affected people of color disproportionately more. So I'm giving you a moment to think about this. But the fact that you have joined me today, you probably have deep interest in this topic and have made a categorical commitment to equity. So there's a lot of burden lies on your shoulders, and I appreciate your commitment to that. And now the question really is, it comes down to policy and it comes down to budget. So let's talk about America's struggle with equity. As we think about this, a 2011 Department of Education study showed that 45% of high poverty schools received less state and local funding than that was typical for other schools in their district. And this is a really important thing. If you are belong to a particular district, take a look at what your Title I schools are, what percentage of your schools belong to Title I. And then you can be guaranteed that there's a close to 50% possibility that they are not receiving the funding that is really proportionate to the need that they have. So that's where equity needs to show. If we were really equitable country, we will be not stuck at 45% of distribution there. Second study was 2019 Ed Builder report showed that the majority of white districts received $23 billion more than majority non-white districts. I just want you to maybe comment something. What are you thinking as you're listening to this? I think we have deep concerns, but the concerns need to really actualize in the way we allocate resources. And allocating resources needs to come from our heart and needs to come from policies that support our heart's desires. So any thoughts about this? As I proceed, I'm throwing another little question in your chat box for you here. Take a minute to reflect and comment here how we prioritize equity in education such that it distinguishes between the achievement gap versus the opportunity gap. So sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but this might be a good way to kind of think. Achievement gap is saying some children are not achieving per expectation. Are they not motivated? Are they not engaged? Are they not caring? Opportunity gap is, do they even show up at the table where they have access to things that allow such an engagement possible for them? So definitely we haven't, as a country, prioritized equity enough. And I'm emphasizing enough because I do think that we are moving and constantly discussing, but we haven't done enough. Because if we did, then we would have taken the time to understand poverty and its impact on developing brain, which I'm about to talk to you about, make a greater commitment to changing policies, and we will distinguish policies that disproportionately affect Black or students of color more, we would remove those policies. And then our financial investment, which is a very specific way of supporting and be less punitive. So thank you, Kim, for sharing your thoughts. Continuing, so achievement gap is more likely an opportunity gap. So that's my case as I make this case here, that the route to achieving equity will not be accomplished through treating everyone equally. It will be achieved by treating everyone justly, according to their circumstances. And this is what Paula Dressel, who is from Race Matters Institute, talks about. And so a fantastic invitation for all to think about. Thank you, Elizabeth, for commenting and sharing how you're approaching things. So now let's move into student success. And now that I have set the stage regarding equity challenges, now let's think about student success challenges. So the US Department of Education has identified students take responsibility for their own learning as one of the vital conditions for student, teacher, and school success. Great, I love it, I'm behind it. Now the question is, how? How does public education and learner success be guaranteed where students know how to take responsibility for their learning? So a successful K-12 educational experience aspires to produce highly self-directed, self-aware, and engaged learners. That's what they want. But the question I have for all of you, is it skill gained or is it skill trained? So skill trained is actually a prioritizing teaching these skills. Skills gained is because you are in the educational experience, you inculcate these things that may be explicit or implicit, and mostly implicit, and you may or may not pick up those skill set. And I'm going to make a case that mostly if you don't make it explicit, they're not going to be picked up. Thank you, I think, Tina, for joining from Corrections in Maryland. Welcome. So let's talk about now executive function. So executive function is a set of skills essential for appropriately adjusting one's thoughts, emotions, actions in accordance with changing environment and challenging times to achieve personal goals. So there are three important parts. These are set of skills. This is not a thing, it's many things. Second, it is in accordance to the context. So the context is the key. So I am on the playground, I'm screaming and enjoying myself. And after the playground, I'm in kindergarten and I walk into the library. Now I have to use my inside voice. So in the changing environment, I change my behaviors and response. That requires executive function. And challenging times, which is I turned in a paper and teacher thought it was absolutely not at par. I need to take the paper, make changes to the paper such that I will get the desired grade. Now, the desired grade, it comes back to the third aspect of executive function, which is goal-directed behavior. But more importantly, goal-directed persistence. So one of the concerns I have is we are teaching, but do we have means and mechanisms in place that allow us to teach how to persist until you achieve the goals? And that is not explicit part of the curriculum. And of course, those who are interested and are part of special ed understand that is a skill building process. So now I'm going to talk about much more higher level overview of executive function, because quite often, actually, it is a little bit frustrating for me if people only include organization and planning and binder management and note-taking and planner. Those are one aspect of executive function, but that goes deeper than that. So I'm going to talk about these impulse control, ability to hold back, long-term planning. That means seeing how do I achieve things that are due in 3 weeks, 3 months? How do I affect my performance in my first semester of school versus second semester? How do I get ready for college-ready classes? So that requires long-term planning, remembering to remember, which requires you to remember that you forget. Gratification postponement, which is delaying the mental tease you feel while you watch Netflix when you have homework to do. I mean, kids may not be watching Netflix, they may be watching YouTube, whatever. Simulation of the future. So this is a particular psychological and cognitive process whereby you actually do something called future forecasting. That means you walk through this mental plane and see yourself do something in the future. That requires an amazing capacity to visualize and conceptualize your continuous self through time. And that is a really difficult concept for the developing brain to do, because it's completely responsible duty of prefrontal cortex, and it is in the state of emergence. Then critical reasoning, collaborative decision-making, emotional and social regulation. There's a great conversation right now happening, which makes me so happy, that most educators are talking explicitly about how do we promote social emotional learning, and how as a community we create so to speak, till the soil where students feel they belong, students feel that they're appreciated and valued, students feel that they are different, but they're okay to be different. They are included and they are loved and cared for. That is one aspect of executive function. Executive function, though, that will not necessarily lead to successful goal-directed persistence, because it's operated and governed by different parts of the brain. So we need curriculum and we need process-based training that addresses all aspects of independence and self-development, and adaptive flexibility, and seeing the big picture. Seeing the big picture is a really called Gestalt thinking. And this is an important aspect where we are able to allow ourselves to see the point of it all. And so one of the reasons I like to emphasize for educators that a common question I get, how do I engage children? And if you are concerned about children's engagement, you can definitely see that they are disconnected from the big picture. They do not have a deep understanding of the Gestalt. How do these tiny, tiny pieces of my educational learning experience connect to a bigger picture of me in the future? And that's what I'm in business of teaching. So this is how I conceptualize executive function. This is my model of siphoning the research of, there are 32 ways to define executive function, but I feel there are three tiers of executive function proficiency. One is foundational skills, intermediate skills, and advanced skills. So in the younger years, the student needs to manage effort, manage attention, self-control. They need to manage their emotions, and they need to initiate and take actions and be flexible. So these are the kids who need to really cooperate and listen. They need to sit in the class, pay attention to the teacher, follow the directions. But that's not adequate when you go to middle school, right? You need a little bit more advanced skills in addition to these skills. So they don't go away. We're expecting some proficiency, but we are also expecting you to manage your time, manage your tasks, manage your projects, manage your goals to produce results, and take decisions that are informed and problem solving in nature, that allows you to advocate and communicate your own needs successfully to the world. Finally, the advanced executive function. These are the college and career readiness level skills. These are really the ninja warrior skills of executive function. They are managing multifaceted priorities of life, weighing options, adapting and shifting, all to serve the needs of the long-term future self. So this is when you begin to craft a vision of future self, and that understanding of this today's me is kind of not motivated, doesn't care, but if I continue this way, I might get bad grades, teachers may not like my engagement level, and this can really affect my relationship to my learning. I need to change myself. So all these advanced skills are informed by metacognitive abilities. So then let's think about the iceberg of competence. So in the context of education and learning, a very important thing that is happening. Above the iceberg, you're seeing behaviors, actions, and inactions. A child who doesn't get started with homework, that's inaction. You are going to think, are you lazy? Are you disinterested? What's wrong with you? Are you defying me? But what is really intangible or invisible or below the iceberg is really the skills and abilities, or lack thereof, that is not actualizing the behaviors into desirable behaviors. So how does that mean? Let's take code of conduct. Give me a second. So this is Georgia School of Department of Ed. They have described a code of conduct as failure, and I translate that as failure to meet expectations. That means you're failing to demonstrate respect for self or others, demonstrate courtesy to others, fail to behave in a responsible manner, fail to attend class regularly. These are the behaviors, going back to the iceberg analogy, that teachers are expecting to see. And if you don't show those behaviors, you are going to be written up as somebody who is not being respectful of the engagement process. What is failed is to be incorporated as a way to gauge students' capacity. Do they have the skills that support the behaviors, which is executive function? And I'm not talking about behaviors that means, is the student polite? Is the student throwing a tantrum? Is the student throwing chairs at the teacher? Or is the student turning off the Zoom? That is actually maybe misinterpreted as anger, defying, or inability to monitor emotions. But really, the three foundational executive function skills may be absent, which is failure to self-control, failure to cooperate, and failure to care. By the way, failure to care, which is a part of that Gestalt thinking, the big picture thinking, is the reason why we are able to weave in our sense of purpose into stuff that's boring, annoying, tedious, and disinteresting. That is a highest form of engagement of attention. So the real question is, are we teaching this? Well, now let me bring this back to educational context. So research shows that if we talk about one particular set of subject-specific skills, which is math, so it's relevant because, research shows that students with strong executive function tend to score higher in math. And do you know why? Because they are able to pay laser-focused attention to math activities, ignore distracting thoughts, not distractions, distracting thoughts. Wait, this doesn't make sense. What does it require? Addition, multiplication? So those are internal distracting thoughts that need to be put aside. That's called working memory management. Then hold math facts in mind and work with those math facts. That's another finessed executive function skills. Flexibly shift between different strategies to solve complex problems. So yes, students with strong executive function definitely show great executive function skills. But now let's bring in the equity issue. What this data set did, this is the data from National Center of Education Statistics, and this was 7,615 students, and their math skills were looked at, fourth grade math ability, and they separated the data from income level. And guess what they found? They found that the weaker executive math gap is very small if you compare students with strong executive function, no matter their socio-economic background. And this is a really critical way I am proposing we bridge the equity gap, that we need to really pay attention that in spite of low income students' background who have less opportunity, they, if are provided an opportunity, which can be an opportunity gap if we don't, a support and categorical and systematic training of executive function, they are likely to perform better. Stronger executive function may help to overcome challenges in learning under-resourced schools. Very, very important research finding. And finally, the strengthening executive function intentionally has stronger benefits for low-income students, and the slope is less steeper. That's the most important thing for you all to think about. So this is my conceptualization of how we often do not talk about executive function. When I talk to schools, they are often concerned, Sucheta, my teachers have too many things on their plate. And I often like to say, however, are you strengthening the plate? Let's not think about executive function as one more thing to be added to the plate. Executive function is the plate, and let's not use a paper plate. Let's use a real ceramic plate, or let's put multiple plates so that it is as good as a ceramic plate. I'm not sure if ceramic plate is a good analogy, but you get the picture. So highly developed executive function skills are foundational to management of learning. So a success in art, science, music, history, English, math is dependent on not the content, but the process of managing learning. So I am not saying this alone. This is not Sucheta Kamath philosophy. We have 30 years of research that backs this up. This is a data that was published in 2011 by Moffitt and her colleagues, who did a longitudinal study on more than 1,000 children who they followed for 32 years. And guess what? They found the single most critical component responsible for children's success over the lifespan was self-control. So executive function, if and when is present, it can really act as a change maker. It can change outcomes in the area of jobs, higher income, improved health, stronger relationships, and fewer run-ins in the law. We have gotten it all backward. We are taking children who are in trouble. We are sending them to correction facilities. We are sending them to principals. We are kicking them out of school, giving them suspensions. All our opportunities lost to teach how to learn, how to learn to manage learning, and how to understand self as a learner. So a quick invitation. Do you mind sharing with me what you're thinking about what I'm saying? Is this speaking to you? Take a minute to reflect and comment. How do you think executive function training will enhance student agency and hence improve student independence? So instead of focusing on content, in addition, let's also focus on process of learning how to learn. Any thoughts? I would love to hear what you have to say. So as you take a minute to write, let me continue to introduce now some educational philosophy. So this is what there are a lot of experts who are talking about the pedagogy and deeply rooted principles that can help us work towards equity in schools. And thank you, Kim, for saying that. I think the process is so very important. It's the implementation. I need more support on that. 100%. You nailed it. I think that's exactly my sentiment as well. Thank you, Carol. Carol says absolutely would equip the students to be independent and eager in learning. Yes, I think motivational management should be a compulsory curriculum concept, because imagine teachers herding cats versus students saying, I want to learn what you're teaching. What a shift in thinking, right? So there are 4 things to consider. One is acknowledge that our system, practices, and narratives are designed to perpetuate disparities of outcome. Second, deliberately identify barriers. And one barrier I have helped you identify is executive function-centered curriculum. Third is constantly examine personal identities, bias, both personal and collective contributions. This is not the presentation. I did not have a time to talk about teacher perceptions and its influence of student outcomes. So that's another topic for another time, but there's a great disparity. We are sometimes accidentally underestimating students' capacity based on the color of their skin. Then allocating or reallocating resources. So budget and policy needs to be every educator's mission to get in there and really push the agenda to really allocate resources, because if we don't do that intentionally, no accidental equity is going to come on board. And lastly, cultivate the gifts and talents. So I am making a proposition of 4 key curriculum principles that foster executive function for equitable outcomes. And these are 4 principles. And I'm going to share with you one of the ways I have tried to develop a curriculum and create all kinds of resources and entire platform that is informed by these principles, that is available to those who are interested. Happy to share more if you like. I am not promoting on this on this webinar to talk about this curriculum, but I'm definitely passionate about teaching executive function a very strategic and specific way. And unless it is an intention, it is not going to become an action. So what are the key 4 curriculum principles? Number 1, teach developmentally appropriate self-regulation skills by scaffolding 3 levels of executive function. I already talked to you what those 3 levels were. You will be getting this handout, so you can take a look at it. You can share. Please invite your colleagues to listen to it. We'll have recording of it. The idea again here is developmentally appropriate. It takes prefrontal lobes to mature until age 25. If you have a learning disability that affects the development of prefrontal cortex, such as ADHD, Asperger's, or ASD, spectrum disorder, like language-based learning disabilities, dyslexia, those are developmentally related trajectory that depend on the integration of things by the prefrontal cortex. And research shows there's even further delay in the maturation of the brain. But what are we having children do without the brain that has not caught up with the maturation? We are letting them drive. We are asking them to choose colleges. We are asking them to make career decisions. We are asking them to pay attention and do homework that doesn't even matter to them. So we are putting a lot of burden on the brain that is self-blind. And so we need to really understand this meaningfully, intentionally, and with great compassion, and not to get disheartened. By the way, the most amazing thing I don't want to forget to mention is brain is incredibly plastic, and that doesn't sound as impressive as the neuroplasticity of the brain is proven to be dynamic and constantly in a state of transcendence. So let's take advantage of that transcendence in our brain. So principle 1, I mentioned. Principle 2, differentiate learning based on individualized assessment. What we are doing math assessment. Does your math assessment tell you how the student's working memory is and how well the student is able to recall math facts as he's converting mathematical principles to apply to a word problem? How many of you in the audience actually know this problem, right? Students, great math understanding. The minute you convert from a mathematical problem into word problem, boom, the performance depletes. Why? Because word problems require application of knowledge in working memory, and that is a skill. We do not have any curriculum that's teaching that unless we create one. And I have one for you. Principle 3, teach personal problem solving through task analysis, saliency determination process, deliberate practice for personal agency, productivity, and future success. There are lots of key components here, but I want to distinguish for all of you. You might have experiences with students. How many of you know highly capable underachievers, right? You're probably nodding and I can't see you, but what does that mean? Highly capable underachievers are fundamentally not taking their talent to solve problems for self. So I have a problem that I don't like Spanish, but you know what? I am great in making comments in math and science, and I'm great in finishing labs. I'm just not doing that mathematical and scientific thinking and applying to my own life, which is difficulty with Spanish. So that ability to do that is a really important application or adaptability of a prefrontal cortex, which allows executive function to do very easily. And finally, build a curriculum that empowers students to master work habits, growth mindsets, internal speech, and promote self-sufficiency. Engage in video and written journaling to accentuate soft skills. And I hate the term soft skills because it undermines the tremendous empowerment that one can have, is that ability to read the minds of others, which is called theory of mind, and strategically self-advocate. So I love that, Kim. Thank you. In Colorado, she's saying we call them essential skills. Heck yeah. Yes, these are highly essential skills. Thank you for actually shifting the narrative from soft skills to essential skills. I love it. So now let's look at this. Going back to this, are these skills emerged because the students were in the educational experience, or are these skills trained, right? So students who are self-directed and highly engaged in their own learning demonstrate strong executive function. And few things to remember about that: these are skills, not gifts. No one is born with great executive function. There is definite propensity of certain brains to develop these abilities with very little explicit training, but majority of us benefit from some explicit experiential learning. So one important caveat about executive function: these are motor planning skills. That means the prefrontal cortex and the motor strip are right next to each other, and they are governed by doing. These are not intellectual skills. They are not let me ponder about changing the world. No, you need to go out there and change the world. That going out there and doing is executive function. Thinking about doing it one day is not executive function. That is called being in your head. Second, they're slow to emerge. That means an 11-year-old is less proficient than a 16-year-old. But if you take all 16-year-olds, there are going to be those 1/3 students who are naturally emergent in their executive function proficiency. They are the teacher's pet. They actually say, can I ask you a question? They come and see you after class. They ask, they send emails. And then there's 1/3 who's struggling as stragglers. And they are the ones who might look like they don't care. So I really want to passionately advocate for all those kids that we know who appear to not care and view them as they are not proficient in their executive function skill development. The third is the rate of development varies, as I just mentioned. Lag can be disruptive. As I said, impulse control is a skill of the prefrontal cortex. If this is lagging, and if there are 17 kids in on a Zoom call, and this happened to me this morning as I was volunteering, there was a kid who had his hand up the whole time. The teacher had instructed that there are no questions to be asked. They were muted, but he kept the hand. He was so eager. I was reading a digital book. The book was flipping pages. This is a cute, adorable 6-year-old whose hand was up for 30 minutes. I love that engagement, but he was sitting in the front. He did not look around. So the situational understanding of looking and learning by other people's observational skills is a part of executive function that is a little bit delayed for this child, but that can be perceived as disruptive behavior because the teachers told him 3 times to put the hand down. He didn't, but he was right in the front, so he was blocking the camera view for some kids. Now, that may be misinterpreted as disruption and may receive punitive treatment if we don't understand a link between skills, neuroscience of skills, and neuroscience of behavior. And last 2 points, teaching is not ubiquitous. That means this is not natural part of teacher training curriculum. And last, the methodology of teaching executive function is highly specialized. I have spent last 22 years in my career. I have landed in this space. I've been doing this at a curricular level for last 12 years. That kind of specialization, if I was not in this zone of practice, I would not have been able to speak elegantly about it. I hope I'm speaking elegantly, but this is a really specialized process. Now, mounting evidence shows that teaching executive function and cognitive skills lead to positive outcomes in not just learning, but in life. So we have data now. This is a Learning Policy Institute report from 2017 that showed that we see improved classroom climate, instructional support, improved college and career readiness, higher graduation rate, proven prevention of bullying and low-level aggression, reduction in teacher stress, reduced exclusionary discipline and discipline disparities, and improved social performance. So there's job outcomes and higher education attainment. So this has pervasive impact on many aspects of learning in life, and we should really not needing any proof. I remember 10 years ago, people used to say, how many studies do we have? You know, what does it say? Like, how do we even know this works? And now I'm so glad that I can tell you actually, yes, we not only we have a report that took a look at 25 different methodologies and came up with that conclusion. So now in my last part of my presentation, I want to share with you ExQ, which is a 100% digital platform designed to directly deliver curriculum. And I'm going to discuss the 4 principles with you as to how to do it. And Lisa, thank you for sharing that. That again, going back to this concept of dedicated time and effort and specialized way of supporting this. So this is a individualized learning to build mastery of executive function through games, error analysis, and metacognitive skills. I have done many presentations on metacognition, which if you have a time, take a look at our library. But metacognition is self-regulated learning. How do I think about my thinking, and how do I think about my learning? So principle 1, if you are considering curriculum, make sure it teaches self-regulation in the context of integrated framework that addresses 3 tiers of foundational, intermediate, and advanced executive function, so that it is in sync with the developing brain. So in the elementary school, it will look different. In the middle school and high school, it will look different. And in ExQ, this is how we do it. We address foundational executive function by training 3 areas of cognition called focus, working memory, and mental flexibility. We have exclusive assessment and intervention or approaches built into that. Intermediate level, we teach organization planning, problem solving, and that's self-directed problem solving, by the way, memory and perspective memory, which is how to remember, and then advanced executive function skills, which is metacognition, which is that self-awareness, gestalt thinking, future self, and self-awareness and strategic thinking. So next, principle 2, a curriculum that automatically differentiates teaching and learning based on individual preparedness. What set of skills do you bring in August, September of the new academic year? And how can we commit to that individualized work for the whole year? We need to do assessment. Traditional methods right now is that we are assessing only when students are showing significant delay, close to 1 or 2 years of academic delay, and it becomes problematic. Only then we are identifying them with specific problems in the area of executive function, but we are not even using categorical tools that assess executive function. There's a neuropsychological assessment and there's psychoeducational assessment. And traditionally in the context of public schools, we are using a psychoeducational approach, which looks at the brain behavior relationship and its impact on academic performance, but we also need brain behavior relationship and its impact on self-regulation. So that's a different set of testing that we need to use. In ExQ, we start with an assessment for every child. This curriculum is from 6th grade to 12th grade. So every child, no matter whether special needs, general education, or gifted, we do the same approach. We definitely help identify school-related goals and personal goals for learning. We teach students how to prioritize and plan for better results for self, and everything is related to the future self. We have the concept of future self embedded. We help students develop relationship with the future self. We help students write a letter to the future self. We help the student create a video that addresses the future self. And then weekly basis, the student is messaging the future self, this hopeful, optimistic, process-specific effort and saying, hey, buddy, look what I'm doing for you. Next principle, a curriculum that systematically teaches personal problem solving through task analysis, saliency determination, and deliberate practice. By the way, the concept of deliberate practice, for those who know Anders Ericsson's work in PEAK, which is how do experts become experts? So one of the challenges with executive function expertise is you cannot become expert in problem solving because you won't see the same problem again. What you need to become good at is the solving of the problem process. So the problems keep changing, the process stays the same. And that is just the same way we teach math adaptability, or the way we ask students to actually read Huckleberry Finn and then write a paper comparing a character with real life. That adaptive skills is what executive function training needs to incorporate, and it needs to be deliberately practiced. So one of the principles that we have in ExQ is students do not see the same game twice. There is no mastery of training by doing the same game 100 times until you get 100%. It is actually founded in the principle that you need to know to use these abilities and skills to apply to novel situations. So novelty is built into it. And I call that dynamic practice. And there is an opportunity that student gets to revisit their mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and there is coaching and deliberate analysis of mistakes by working on perspective taking process. So then did I skip a third? Okay, no, I'm on track. Okay, so principle number 4 is build a curriculum that empowers students to master work habits, growth mindset, strategize processes that promote self-sufficiency, and engage in that self-reflection process, accentuate soft skills, and strategically advocate for self. So one of the things I want to kind of talk to you about is an ultimate goal of every educator is that, please, Johnny, come and see me. When you tell Johnny 3 times, 4th time, what you're hoping is Johnny now understands that anytime I need help, I can go to Mrs. Smith. This idea of self-seeking, that advocating for yourself in 2 ways, speaking on behalf of yourself when you're misunderstood, and speaking on behalf of yourself when you need help. These are two fundamental abilities that are often get tucked under the umbrella of communication skills or soft skills, but these are vital to self-agency. How do I become successful? What do I know about my lack of success? What do I know about my strengths and challenges? What am I not doing well? Where is the friction in my learning? So in ExQ, we have very highly specialized processes that build growth mindset. We have personalized and tailored strategies that we present to students, where student gets to decide, I already use this. No, I would like to remember to use this. We have a process where we feed that information to educators. So when they have one-on-one time with the students in their strategy class or in their advisory, or this information can also be shared with their parents. And finally, every aspect of learning eventually translates into strategic thinking. So I will tell you, one of the most successful ways to educate children with executive function centric curriculum is to create self-devised strategic thinkers. That means students who understand self-devised process. I came up with this for me, based on my knowledge of me, based on what I'm good at, based on what works for me, based on what I don't like, and based on what I like. So finally, as I summarize for all of you, with 5 minutes to spare, because I would love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts and comments or questions, feel free to mention them. I would have 5 minutes to talk to you about that. But as I summarize this, I feel very passionately that equity is an approach. It is not accidental result of something. It is an intentional processes put in place so that student success is carefully crafted through commitment, action, and intentional introspection about self as an institution, about self as leadership, and about self as a teacher. So if the approach interlinks curriculum with technology to innovate learner preparedness, the experience can be magnanimously rewarding. Why? Because it will be inclusive, it will be fun and engaging, it will be individualized, and it will lead to highly flexible and adaptive content. It will be wider reaching. Can you imagine a classroom of 40 kids? In the given hour, they all are on a digital curriculum that gives them personalized coaching and one-on-one digital AI coach that is training them to develop these skills. And what a best way to make use of your time. And then you have more time to discuss the student's success and students' capacity to reflect on their own learning. Finally, it's demonstrative of global trends of balance between student strength and challenges. And finally, it's highly beneficial and gratifying to those who are committed to teaching for equity.